Hey, yeah, it's me, Jesse from the Janjo Zone, here for another Dual Sauce Extra Sauce. Yeah, we got something special. We got the top 5 spiciest techs of the Yugi Kaiba format. So what are they? Let's enter the draw phase and jump right into it. Dual Sauce Extra Sauce. Hit that subscribe. So there's not a ton of variety in this format. You only have the 3 sets, the Yugi and Kaiba starter decks, and the Legend of the Blue Eyes White Dragon booster pack. So there's not a ton of great cards that are kind of remaining in there after the meta is said and done. Most of the decks have already sort of settled. Sure, there's some techs that are more desirable than others, things that change out as people play different kinds of cards that become a bit more meta viable or a little less meta viable, but there's still plenty of bad cards in the set. So there's not a ton to pick from, but I feel like I've played the format long enough I can kind of see what cards that people don't really use that often, and I feel like could potentially be, well, used more often. So let's start with number 5. So number 5, we got 2 Prong Attack. This is probably the most weird entry on the list. This is a card I see no one play. Quite frankly, why would they? The problem with 2 Prong Attack is that you tribute 2 monsters to destroy one of your opponents. Now, it would be one thing if it was tribute 2 to destroy 1 card on the field, like a crappier Raigeki break, but it's just a 2-for-1 monster card. So why is this on the list? Well, I think it does have potential, maybe a one of in a deck. See, I think its utility could lie in the fact that you never want to commit too many monsters on the board, knowing that your opponent has a Dark Hole and a Raigeki. So most of the time you're usually committing no more than, let's say, well, 2 monsters. And if you're worried about your opponent using something like a Trap Hole or a Dark Hole, Fissure, Raigeki, any sort of wiping cards, any sort of monster destruction, you're able to chain 2 Prong Attack because it is a trap card. Because with Trap Hole, it's not that it's if your opponent summons a monster, is like once they summon it, you can use it. So therefore, you can still chain a 2-pronged attack to it. So if your opponent does have something like a Dark Hole or Raigeki, you can use 2-pronged attack, get rid of monsters that would be destroyed anyway to destroy something on your opponent's side of the field. And sure, while you're out 2 monsters, but hey, they're going to be dead anyway, and your opponent is out 1. And if your opponent has a Trap Master, let's say your 2-pronged attack, then you're not really losing too much value from that. If anything, they lose more value because they're not hitting that Trap Hole, or they're not hitting that Reinforcements or Wabaku. So I think 2-pronged attack potentially could be unique. I don't know if we'll see more people use it. I don't know if something that people want to test out, but I feel like it does have some utility that has been untapped. Wait, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, because that helps me upload more videos and know that you like content like this. So number 4, we got Armed Ninja. Ninjas are cool, and they first started in the Legend of the Blue Eyes. The Armed Ninja is like Trap Master, but instead of trap cards, he flips summons to destroy spell cards. Now this isn't nearly as useful because, well, quick play spells weren't a thing back then. They weren't a thing until, what, Spell Ruler? So Armed Ninja really only sees play in some side decks and a back row control deck. Otherwise, you don't really see him at all, and I feel like nowadays a lot of people are setting spell cards because a lot of people want to play around Trap Master. And if you have Armed Ninja just kind of already defaultly in your deck, you can kind of snipe these out pretty decently. Now, obviously, Despell is a thing. I'm not gonna deny that, but Armed Ninja is just another way to get rid of this. Plus, he's also a defensive card for you, so you can set him, you can protect yourself for at least a turn if your opponent only has 1 monster, to potentially protect yourself and get rid of a spell card. Despell doesn't really quite have that. And as the game goes on, if they set that spell card and they don't activate it, then you have more options to deal with it. If you don't draw into a Despell, you have an Armed Ninja in there. I don't think Armed Ninja is particularly that fantastic, but there's definitely some spice to be had with it. And this isn't the greatest cards of all time list, this is the spicy list. So moving on to number 3, we have the weirdly named Guacamole Mega Man. Yep, Guacamole Mega Man. That's what I'm calling her. So Gyakutenumagami is a kind of a cool card because sure, it's a 5-star monster. That kind of inherently sucks. The only trade monsters you usually play are a Summon Skull or Curse a Dragon or Blue Eyes in a Dragon deck. Otherwise, Summon Skull is your go-to. But what Gyakutenumagami has going for her is that she actually has pretty good stats. Yeah, she has 1800 attack, which is Lodgin level, so it's okay, but the thing is that she has a decently high defense, which means that when you tribute summon her or potentially use a soul exchange, you can set her instead. This means she can play around trap hole, and then when you flip her up, or if your opponent attacks into you, and then you change her to attack mode, is that she'll have attack equal to a lodge-in. So you essentially have another lodge-in in the deck, and if you're having a monster on the field already, like a Battle Ox or Neo, and you kind of want to upgrade a little bit, this would be a card to do for that. And I've seen it before. Some players like it more than others. You don't see it that often, but when you do, you're like, that's what they're doing. And it's kind of similar to Reaper in the cards in that regard, that Reaper does have a high defense and it can attack trap cards, but with Megami is that you still have that attack afterwards. So once you lose that utility Reaper cards, you're kind of screwed. But Megami does have multiple ways it can be played, and I really like that for it, because if you want to tribute it just to attack mode, sure, go ahead, tribute that giant soldier stone you don't need for a lodge-in level monster. Sure, go ahead. It's something that you have that has bit more utility than the Summon Skull. I'm not saying it's better than Summon Skull, but there's definitely spice to be had, and I love the spice. Give me the spice. And by the way, if you have any recommendations for this kind of stuff, let me know down below in the comments, because I take everything people say into consideration. So before we get to number 2, I want to have a couple of honorable mentions. So I want to mention Lord of D. Now, Lord of D obviously is used in Dragon deck to summon your big, bad, Blue Eyes White Dragon and other sorts of dragons. There is a possibility to maybe run a one of him in other decks just to potentially bait out Trap Hole, because most of the time when I see someone play Lord of D, he's usually Trap Hole, because your opponent can tell, oh, you have at least 2 to 3 cards in your hand. That's probably a Flute of Summoning Dragon or a Blue Eyes, some sort of combination for the combo you need. I don't want that because that's awful. Let me Trap Hole your Lord of D. And if your opponent does that and you're not actually running a dragon deck, well, boom, there you go. You can take Lord of D out in the side deck. I feel like for a game 1, he's kind of an interesting choice for that, for a 1200, because it can scare your opponent to try and get rid of him faster, making them use resources, and that's an honorable mention for me. Another one is Ukazi, because so many times I get down to low life points, or I get my opponent to low life points, and I want to just finish the game out with the spell Gaga Cowboy. And Ukazi definitely has a good burn to it. It has 800. There's also Just Desserts, but that also relies on monsters. Ukazi you can activate whenever you want to really top deck clutch a game, and that's kind of spicy. Now, Equip cards is another one where you have a card like Sora Dark Destruction or Invigoration, where you can boost up a Battle Ox or a Neo or a Lodgin, any sort of equip cards. I don't think field spells are really that good in this format, but equip cards I think has potential, because while in equip decks and like fiend equip decks, you tend to go neg a lot, because once you equip your monster and your opponent uses a fissure or something, then all of a sudden you're out 2 cards. If you just kind of splash a couple in a regular standard beatdown deck, I think there is potential to give monsters that extra boost, and if you lose it, then oh well, you lose it, because you kind of want to save it for your bit weaker monsters. Not necessarily that you're running weak monsters, you're still running decent monsters, but it is a little extra something you could have in there that you wouldn't really mind losing if it gives you that slight advantage. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it yet, but that's definitely something I want to throw for honorable mentions. So moving on to number 2, we have kind of a popular one in the Wicked Worm Beast. From what I gather, it seems that half the players hate him, half the players love him. It really kind of depends who you are. He is the original spirit monster, in which at the end phase he goes back to your hand. Now he only has 1300 attack, so he's not beating over a ton of monsters, but he does have the great utility of dodging spell destruction cards like Raigeki, Dark Hole, Fissure. So if you're at that point in the game where your opponent really has nothing left protecting them, then the Wicked Worm Beast can be a great card to just kind of slap on the field and go, hey, figure out some other way to take care of this guy because he's going to keep attacking you. And it's also a great way to create a board presence without overcommitting, so you can have strong monsters on the field and kind of summon him for extra time to attack, and then at the end of the turn you get a card back, so it works in that regard. I think there's definitely a lot going for Wicked Worm Beast. I'm not personally a big fan of him. I think he's a bit too weak and too particular in the situations that you kind of need him to be good in, because otherwise he's not beating over anything, he's not defending you from anything, and I feel like that's kind of a big issue with him. But I can't ignore that a lot of people like him and that he does have a good presence when he hits the field. So right before number 1, let's recap my top 5 so far, and that's 2-Pronged Attack, Arm Ninja, Gyakutenumagami, Guacamole Mega Man, and the Wicked Worm Beast. So this is number 1. So number 1 we have Last Will. This is a card that I really don't see that often in competitive Yugi Kaiba decks, and I'm not really sure why. I personally love the card, whether it's a 1 or 2 of. 3 of, I don't know, but Last Will, basically what it does is that, because a lot of people don't know because it's still on the ban list as of 2020, is that when your monster's destroyed, is that you can special summon a monster with 1500 or less attack to the field. Now this is really one of the very few ways to special summon a monster in this 2002 format. The other one would be, Flute of Summoning Dragon or Monster Reborn. But Last Will really kind of was that only other card. Eventually it was errata to where it could be activated whenever, but early on you're supposed to use it before monsters were destroyed, which made it a little bit weaker, but still worked out, because if your opponent had a lot of back row and you're fearing a trap hole or reinforcements, you could summon your Lojin or any monster with relative ease, with knowing that if it's destroyed that you can just summon something else from it. It's also nice because I've used before where you summon a weaker monster, attack into a bigger monster, and then summon out some defense, whether it was a giant soldier stone or a wall of illusion. There's a lot of great utility Last Will has to keep your advantage going, even if you're going technically, was it -1, I think is how that would work. But in the grand scheme of things, it does still protect you from a multitude of things. It makes your opponent think to use certain cards otherwise, and there's a lot Last Will can do to really help you out in a game, and I love to see this card used more. There's definitely ways to have it where it doesn't benefit you at all, and that is kind of unfortunate. Whether you know your monster isn't going to get destroyed or you're not quite sure, but those are kind of risks that you kind of have to take, or just use it in a much smarter way. But definitely Last Will, I think, is a very spicy card that I think of all the cards, I think has the biggest ceiling of potential to see more play, and that's why I have it for number 1. So let me know what you think about this list. What cards would you put on it? What cards would you change? What cards do you try out? What other lists would you want to see from me? Let me know my various social medias, whether it is my Discord or it is on my Twitter, and feel free to check out my merch and my Patreon, because I got that stuff too. And of course, until then, have a wonderful day.